The German Shepherd had been staring at the same empty hospital doorway for 4 hours when the heart monitor inside room 214 suddenly skipped a beat. Not barked, not growled, just stared, rigid as stone beneath the pale fluorescent lights of Charleston Veterans Hospital. The dog didn't react to nurses rushing past or the squeak of rubber soles against polished tile. But the second a tall doctor in blue scrubs stepped off the elevator, the shepherd's lips peeled back in silence. One low rumble vibrated deep in his chest. The strange part wasn't the aggression. It was that the doctor never looked surprised to see it. Before we begin, tell me, we're watching from Drop Your Country in the comments. I'd love to see how far this story travels. The hallway smelled like antiseptic and burnt coffee, the kind left sitting too long on a warming plate at 3 in the morning. Outside, rain tapped softly against the dark hospital windows overlooking the harbor, and somewhere far below, a foghorn groaned across the Atlantic like a warning swallowed by the storm. Shadow remained planted outside ICU room 214. Front paws stretched across the doorway. Amber eyes unblinking. Every few seconds his ears twitched toward the machines inside the room as though he were listening to something no one else could hear. He's been like this since they brought the Marine in, one nurse whispered near the station desk. Won't eat either. Probably trauma, another replied quietly. Military dogs get attached. But the first nurse shook her head. No, this feels different. Inside the room, Staff Sergeant Mason Reed lay unconscious beneath a thin white blanket, his body bruised beneath the hospital gown. A thick bandage wrapped around the left side of his head, for fluid dripped steadily through the clear line connected to his arm. Beep. Pause. Beep. The machines sounded calm. Too calm. Shadow suddenly lifted his head higher. His nostrils flared once. Then again. The elevator at the end of the corridor dinged softly. A man stepped out wearing dark blue scrubs beneath a white coat. Late 50s, silver hair neatly combed back. His ID badge swung lightly against his chest as he walked. Dr. Adrian Mercer. The overhead lights flickered once above him. Shadow stood immediately. Not frantic, not loud. Slow. Intentional. The dog's massive frame blocked the doorway entirely now. A deep growl rolled through the corridor low enough that the vibration seemed to hum beneath the floor tiles themselves. Every conversation near the nurse station stopped. Dr. Mercer froze for half a second before smoothing his expression into a practiced smile. Easy there, he murmured. I'm here to help your friend. But Shadow did not move. Rain hammered harder outside. Somewhere down another hallway, a metal tray crashed to the floor, making one of the younger nurses jump. Yet the shepherd never broke eye contact with the doctor. Then came the part no one could explain later. Shadow began whining softly. Not aggressive anymore. Mournful. Like recognition. Like fear. Nurse Claire Bennett stepped closer from the station, arms folded tightly against the cold air conditioning. 32 years old, chestnut hair tied into a loose bun, exhaustion resting beneath her green eyes after a 12-hour shift. She had worked trauma wards for nearly a decade. She knew panic. She knew grief. But the sound coming from that dog unsettled her in ways she couldn't name. Shadow slowly backed into room 214 without turning away from Mercer once. Then he positioned himself beside Mason's bed and pressed his nose lightly against the Marine's hand. The heart monitor immediately steadied again. Beep, beep, beep. Claire frowned. That's strange. Dr. Mercer adjusted his gloves carefully. Too carefully. Animals react unpredictably under stress, he said. But his voice sounded thinner now. Tighter. Shadow's growl returned the instant the doctor stepped toward the force stand. And this time the dog showed his teeth. Claire had seen combat veterans wake screaming from nightmares. She had watched grown men cry silently when memory returned too fast. But she had never seen a trained military dog react with this kind of fear. Not anger. Fear. Shadow stood beside Mason Reed's bed with every muscle locked tight beneath his dark sable coat, his amber eyes fixed on Dr. Adrian Mercer's hand hovering inches from. The foreline. The room suddenly felt smaller, colder. Even the soft fluorescent buzz overhead seemed louder now. Mercer lowered his hand slowly and forced another smile. The dog needs rest, he said calmly. He is overstimulated. Shadow answered with a low rumble that vibrated through the metal bed rails. Claire noticed something then. The doctor's gloves. One latex fingertip carried a faint black smudge near the thumb, almost like ash or machine grease. Strange for a physician working intensive care at nearly 4 in the morning. Mercer adjusted the 4 monitor without looking directly at the dog again. Sergeant Reed suffered severe neurological stress, he continued. Disorientation in service animals is common after traumatic events. Claire nodded politely, but her attention drifted toward the 4 bag hanging above Mason's bed. Clear fluid, standard saline. Yet the printed label looked uneven beneath the overhead light, as if another sticker had been placed over the original one. Before she could step closer, Shadow suddenly moved. Fust! The shepherd lunged between Mercer and the bed, forcing the doctor back half a step. A sharp metallic clink echoed across the floor. Something small rolled beneath the bedside cabinet. Mercer's jaw tightened almost invisibly. "Control your animal," he said, though his voice lacked the authority it carried moments ago. Claire crouched instinctively, reaching beneath the cabinet before anyone else reacted. Her fingers brushed cold metal. She pulled out a silver object no larger than a house key. Not hospital equipment. A flash drive. Scratched along the side were faint military numbers worn nearly smooth with age. Shadow stopped growling the instant Claire touched it. The silence that followed felt wrong. Too heavy. Mercer stared at the drive for one brief second before looking away. "Probably belongs to security," he muttered. "There are maintenance crews in and out all night." But Claire noticed sweat gathering near his temple despite the freezing room temperature. Outside the ICU windows, lightning flickered across the harbor, illuminating the rain in pale silver streaks. Somewhere down the corridor, an intercom crackled with static before cutting dead again. Shadow slowly sat beside Mason's bed, though his eyes never left the doctor. Claire slipped the drive into her scrub pocket without thinking. "I can log it with lost property later," she said softly. Mercer nodded once. Too quickly. Then he checked his watch. "I will return after rounds." He turned toward the doorway. Shadow immediately stood again. Another growl, lower this time, almost warning him not to come back. The doctor paused near the threshold without turning around. "Some things are better left buried." Nurse Bennett. Then he walked out into the corridor. Claire felt a chill crawl up her arms. Not because of the words, because Shadow had started whining again the second the man disappeared around the corner. She moved toward the hallway window and watched Mercer stop near the elevators. The older doctor glanced behind him once. Then he pulled a cell phone from his pocket and whispered something urgently before stepping inside the elevator alone. The doors closed. Claire frowned. Hospital policy prohibited personal calls inside restricted ICU areas during overnight trauma supervision, especially private ones. Behind her came a faint sound. "Talp, talp, talp." She turned. Mason's fingers were twitching weakly against the blanket. Shadow noticed instantly. The shepherd pressed forward, nose nudging carefully against Mason's hand. The heart monitor sped up. Beep, beep, beep. Claire rushed back to the bedside. Mason's eyelids fluttered faintly beneath the bruising around his face. His lips parted slightly. "Shad," he rasped, barely audible. Shadow's tail gave one slow movement against the tile floor. Then Mason's breathing changed. Uneven now, disturbed. His right hand suddenly gripped the bedsheet hard enough to wrinkle it. "Warehouse," he whispered brokenly. "Do not let him." The monitor spiked sharply. Claire leaned closer. "Mason? Who?" His eyes opened only halfway before terror crossed his face so suddenly it froze her in place. He was not seeing the hospital room anymore. He was seeing something else. Somewhere else. Zen. Fire. Darkness. "The doctor," Mason whispered hoarsely. He was there. At that exact moment. The power flickered. The lights came back on 3 seconds later, but the room no longer felt the same. The soft glow above Mason Reed's bed flickered weakly before stabilizing, casting pale color back across the walls of ICU room 214. Yet Shadow remained frozen beside the bed, ears forward, body tense enough that Claire Bennett could see the muscles trembling beneath his thick dark fur. The shepherd was listening again, not to the machines, to the hallway. Claire swallowed hard and looked back toward Mason. His breathing had become shallow and uneven, sweat gathering along his forehead despite the cold air circulating through the vent above him. "Mason," she whispered carefully. His eyes drifted toward her for only a second before fear clouded them again. "Do not let him near the line," he rasped. Claire glanced instinctively toward the bag hanging beside the bed. Clear fluid dripped steadily through the tube. Everything looked normal, but now her stomach twisted every time she looked at it. "Who?" she asked softly. Mason tried to speak again, but pain overtook the words. His gaze shifted suddenly toward Shadow. "He remembers," Mason whispered, and his eyes rolled shut once more. The monitor steadied slightly, but not enough. Claire checked his pulse manually. Too fast. She reached for the chart attached near the foot of the bed and frowned immediately. The medication log had changed. 20 minutes ago, the sedation dosage listed one name. Now another physician's signature appeared beneath it in darker ink. Adrian Mercer. Claire's chest tightened. She flipped through the pages faster. 2 entries were missing entirely, torn clean from the chart. Shadow suddenly stood and turned toward the hallway door with another deep growl vibrating from his chest. Footsteps approached outside. Slow, measured. Claire felt her pulse spike. The footsteps stopped directly outside room 214. Silence followed. No knock, no voice, just stillness. Shadow moved closer to the door. Then came the sound, a faint metallic scrape near the handle. Claire's breath caught. "Who is there?" she called out. No answer. The hallway beyond the small glass window looked empty except for dim, fluorescent reflections stretching across polished floor tiles. But Shadow kept staring, kept growling. Claire slowly stepped toward the doorway, every instinct warning her not to open it. Another scrape, softer this time, then nothing. She reached the glass panel carefully and looked out. Empty corridor, empty nurse station, empty elevators. Yet near the base of the door sat something small and black resting against the floor tile. Claire opened the door only an inch. Shadow pressed beside her immediately. She bent down and picked up the object with trembling fingers. A hospital identification badge. Dr. Adrian Mercer. The clip on the back was bent sharply, almost broken off. Claire stared down the silent hallway. If Mercer's badge was here, where was Mercer himself? A cold gust of air swept through the corridor as one of the distant stairwell doors slowly creaked shut. Somewhere far below, thunder rolled across Charleston Harbor again. Then the overhead speaker crackled alive. Code Blue. 3rd floor, East Wing. Code Blue. Nurses rushed past the far end of the corridor instantly, shoes squeaking against tile, voices urgent and overlapping. Within seconds, the ICU wing emptied almost completely. Claire realized what that meant. Room 214 was suddenly alone. Shadow backed away from the door and returned beside Mason's bed, whining softly now. Not aggressive. Warning. Claire pulled the flash drive from her pocket again, staring at the scratched military numbers etched into the metal surface. Her hand shook slightly. She needed answers. Fast. Because every minute felt wrong now. Every sound, every shadow beneath the flickering lights. She crossed to the computer terminal near the wall and inserted the drive. The screen remained black for 2 long seconds before a password request appeared. Then unexpectedly the system opened by itself. One video file filled the screen. No title, no date, just grainy footage paused mid-frame. Claire clicked play. Static burst across the speakers first. Wind, heavy breathing. Then desert terrain appeared beneath a blazing sun through the shaky angle of a military helmet camera. Marines shouting in the distance. Smoke rising beyond. Crumbling concrete walls. Shadow instantly reacted. The shepherd backed away from the screen and began barking sharply for the first time all night. Claire froze. On the video, Mason's voice shouted through static. This route was compromised. Gunfire echoed faintly in the background. Then another voice answered calmly through radio interference. A familiar voice. Older. Controlled. Claire felt her blood run cold before the face even appeared, because she already knew who it belonged to. The footage cut suddenly to a single frame before freezing completely. A man in civilian clothes turning toward the camera beside a burning warehouse. Silver hair. White collar shirt. Dr. Adrian Mercer. Beneath the image, one line of text flashed briefly across the screen. If you're watching this, he knows I survived. Claire Bennett stared at the frozen image on the monitor while thunder rolled beyond the hospital windows like distant artillery. The grainy frame illuminated the dark ICU room in pale flickers. Mason Reed's face appeared younger in the footage. Dirt streaked across his skin beneath a combat helmet, smoke curling behind him through shattered concrete. And standing near the burning warehouse was Dr. Adrian Mercer. Not older, not retired, not a civilian doctor volunteering at a veterans hospital. He was there, in the desert, in the middle of a mission Mason clearly believed had been betrayed. Shadow paced beside the hospital bed now, nails clicking softly against tile, his agitation growing with every second the footage remained on screen. Claire removed the flash drive immediately and slipped it back in her pocket, just as footsteps echoed somewhere down the corridor. Her pulse jumped. She muted the monitor and turned off the screen. The room dropped back into dim silence, except for the steady beeping of Mason's heart monitor and the storm breathing against the windows. "Claire!" Mason's voice cracked weakly from the bed. She rushed beside him. His eyes were barely open, unfocused beneath exhaustion and medication, but fear lingered there like a shadow that refused to leave. "You need to listen carefully," he whispered. "If Mercer knows I am awake, he will not. Let me leave this place." Claire looked toward the doorway instinctively. Every nursing instinct inside her told her to report everything immediately. Hospital security, administration, police if necessary. But another part of her remembered the missing chart pages, the altered medication label, the badge left outside the door. Someone inside this building had already helped Mercer once. The realization settled cold and heavy in her chest. Who could she trust now? Shadow suddenly stopped pacing. His ears lifted sharply toward the hallway again. Claire heard it a second later. Elevator doors opening. Slow footsteps approaching. Mason noticed the change in the dog instantly. His breathing quickened. "Hide the drive," he rasped urgently. Claire slipped the flash drive deeper into her scrub pocket, just as a young resident physician appeared at the doorway, carrying a clipboard. Dr. Kevin Morales, mid-20s, nervous eyes behind rectangular glasses. "Miss Bennett?" he asked softly. "Administration is looking for you downstairs. They said there was an issue with the ICU system outage." Claire studied him carefully. "Who sent you?" The resident blinked. "Dr. Mercer." Shadow growled immediately. Not loud, just enough. Kevin looked down at the dog, uneasily. I do not think he likes me." Claire forced a small smile she did not feel. "He has had a long night." But her stomach tightened harder now. Mercer knew she was here. Mercer knew the system outage happened. And if he realized the flash drive was missing, how long before he came back himself? Kevin shifted awkwardly near the doorway. Dr. Mercer also asked whether Sergeant Reed regained consciousness. Mason's eyes closed instantly, pretending sleep. Claire answered before Kevin could look too closely. "No change yet." Another pause. Kevin nodded slowly, but uncertainty flickered across his face. "All right, they just wanted an update." He left quietly, footsteps fading down the corridor again. Shadow did not relax. Claire waited until the elevator doors closed in the distance before speaking. "You recognized him in the video," she whispered to Mason. His jaw tightened weakly. Mercer worked private military. Contracts overseas before becoming a doctor. He was attached to logistics support during our deployment. Rain battered the glass harder outside now. Lightning flashed across the harbor, washing the room white for half a second. "What happened out there?" Claire asked. Mason swallowed painfully. "We found evidence somebody was selling troop movements. Weapons, too. We were going to bring everything back stateside." His breathing trembled slightly. But someone leaked our route before extraction. Shadow rested his head gently against the side of the bed, as though grounding him back in the present. Mason's fingers weakly touched the dog's fur. Shadow smelled him before any of us knew. Claire felt chills spread down her arms again. The dog had remembered Mercer's scent all these years. Through hospitals, through rain, through trauma and medication and fear. He remembered betrayal. A sudden alert tone beeped from the monitor station outside room 214. Claire glanced toward the hallway. The ICU system board flashed red beside Mason's room number. Medication review pending. Her blood ran cold. She had not triggered any medication review. No one should have been changing Mason's treatment schedule at 4:30 in the morning. Shadow stood immediately beside the four-pole. Growling again, Claire stepped closer to the saline bag hanging above the bed and finally noticed what the dim lighting had hidden before. Tiny droplets clung to the injection port near the tubing line. Fresh droplets. Someone had already accessed the four. Claire Bennett stared at the tiny droplets clinging to the injection port while her pulse hammered louder than the storm outside. Fresh. Clear. Recently administered. Her eyes lifted slowly toward the medication chart hanging at the foot of Mason Reed's bed. The dosage update timestamp read 4:12 a.m. From minutes ago. But no nurse had entered room 214 during that time. No one except Dr. Adrian Mercer. Shadow stepped closer beside the four stand, his nose twitching rapidly now, ears pinned back against his head. The deep growl on his chest had changed. This was no longer warning. It sounded almost desperate. Claire quickly clamped the line and disconnected the hanging bag with shaking hands. The clear fluid swayed gently beneath the fluorescent lights. Mason watched her through half-open eyes. "What is it?" he whispered weakly. Claire turned the bag over carefully and held it closer to the light. The printed pharmacy barcode had been layered over another label beneath it. She peeled the corner back slightly with her thumbnail. Her breath caught immediately. The original medication was not saline. It was a sedative powerful enough to suppress respiratory function in trauma patients already under neurological observation. "Oh my God," Claire whispered. Mason closed his eyes briefly as if he already expected the answer. "He is trying to keep me unconscious," he murmured. Thunder shook the windows again. Somewhere deeper in the hospital, an alarm beeped twice before cutting off abruptly. Shadow suddenly moved toward the hallway door, barking once sharply. Claire looked through the glass panel. Empty corridor. Yet something felt wrong again. Too still. Too quiet. She grabbed a replacement four bag from the emergency supply cabinet and attached it quickly while keeping one eye on the hallway. Her hands trembled harder now, not from fear alone, from a realization that if Mercer had altered medication inside an intensive care unit, then this was far bigger than one frightened Marine and one loyal dog. Someone inside Charleston Veterans Hospital was protecting him. Mason struggled to push himself higher against the bed. Pain crossed his face immediately. Shadow nudged gently against his arm as though trying to steady him. "The warehouse," Mason said hoarsely. "That footage was only part of it." Claire sat beside the bed. "Then tell me the rest." Rain streaked the dark windows behind them while the ICU lights hummed overhead like distant static. Mason stared at the ceiling for a long moment before speaking again. "Our unit intercepted encrypted military shipments moving through civilian aid routes near Kandahar. Medical crates, food crates, humanitarian supplies." His breathing slowed unevenly, but they were hiding weapons inside. Claire felt chills crawl across her skin. Mason swallowed painfully. Mercer was not called Mercer back then. He worked private logistics under another name. He handled transport inspections before deployment. Shadow whimpered softly beside the bed as if memory itself unsettled him. "We were going to expose the network," Mason continued. "Names, payments, routes, everything." His voice weakened. "But somebody sold our convoy location before extraction." Claire remembered the frozen frame from the flash drive. The burning warehouse. The panic in Mason's recorded voice. "How did you survive?" she asked quietly. Mason's eyes drifted toward Shadow. I do not remember all of it. His jaw tightened. Only fire, dust, gunshots. Then shadow dragging me through smoke after the building collapsed. He paused, but there was something else. Claire leaned closer instinctively. Mason's expression darkened with confusion now instead of fear. Somebody else was there that night. Someone who helped us escape. The heart monitor beeped steadily between his words. A woman. Claire frowned. Who? Mason shook his head weakly. I never saw her face clearly. Lightning flashed outside again, illuminating the room in white for a split second. Shadow suddenly lifted his head sharply toward the television mounted near the far wall. The screen had powered on by itself. Static filled the dark display. Claire stood immediately. That should not even be connected. The static crackled louder. Then, without warning, the image shifted. Security camera footage appeared across the screen. Hospital corridor. Third floor, east wing. Timestamp 4:21 a.m. Claire's blood turned cold. The camera showed Dr. Adrian Mercer standing outside room 214 only minutes earlier. But he was not alone. Beside him stood another figure wearing hospital scrubs and a surgical mask. Tall, female, blonde hair tucked beneath a surgical cap. Mercer handed her something small before both disappeared out of frame. The footage glitched violently for 2 seconds before freezing. Then the screen went black again. Claire stared at the dark reflection, staring back at her. Somewhere inside this hospital, another person was helping Mercer. But the worst realization came 1 heartbeat later. Whoever she was, she still had full access to the ICU floor. The room felt colder after the television screen went black. Claire Bennett stood motionless beside the foot of Mason Reed's bed while rain lashed against the hospital windows in violent waves. The image of the masked woman lingered in her mind like a splinter she could not remove. Blonde hair. Surgical capítulo. ICU access. Shadow paced restlessly now, circling once beside the bed before stopping abruptly near the bathroom door. His ears lifted high. Then he stared directly at Claire. Not at the hallway. At her. A strange silence settled over the room. Mason noticed it too. His breathing slowed as he watched the dog carefully. What is it, boy? He whispered weakly. Shadow gave a soft whine and stepped closer to Claire again, nose brushing lightly against the edge of her scrub pocket where the flash drive rested. Then the dog moved upward, pressing his nose against her wrist. Claire froze. Something inside her chest tightened unexpectedly. Shadow had only behaved this way once all night. Recognition. Mason's eyes narrowed slightly through exhaustion. Claire, he said slowly, have we met before tonight? The question landed heavier than it should have. Claire opened her mouth to answer automatically, but the words stalled, because suddenly something else surfaced. A memory she had buried years ago beneath nursing school and overnight hospital shifts and the exhausting effort of building a normal life. Dust blowing across sunburned concrete. The smell of diesel fuel. A military checkpoint near Kandahar. Her father's frightened voice whispering through a satellite phone. If anyone asks, you never heard my name. Claire's pulse began to pound. Shadow whimpered louder now, pacing faster beside her. Mason stared at her face carefully. Your eyes, he murmured weakly. I remember your eyes. Claire stepped backward instinctively. No, she whispered under her breath. But the memory was already opening like a wound. 8 years earlier, her father had worked overseas under a civilian medical contract supporting military transport routes in Afghanistan. Dr. Elias Bennett, a brilliant surgeon, quiet, nervous, always looking over his shoulder during the final months before he disappeared. Claire had not heard his name spoken aloud in years. Not since the military officially listed him dead after a convoy explosion outside Kandahar. Mason suddenly struggled upright, despite the pain tearing across his face. Bennett, he rasped. That was the name. Claire stared at him, blood draining from her face. What? Shadow barked sharply once. Mason pointed weakly toward the flash drive in her pocket. The woman who helped us escape. She said her father worked logistics medical support. She gave us evidence from the warehouse before the explosion. His breathing shook harder now as fragmented memory returned all at once. She said if anything happened, we had to find her daughter in Charleston. Claire's knees nearly buckled. The room blurred around her for one terrible second. No, she whispered again, tears burning unexpectedly behind her eyes. My father died overseas. Mason's expression darkened with painful realization. I did not think he did. Thunder cracked so loudly outside the windows that Shadow flinched beside the bed. The heart monitor accelerated sharply. Beep, beep, beep. Claire pressed both hands against the edge of the counter, trying to steady herself. Her father. The missing years. The terrified phone calls before his disappearance. The way he used to lock every door twice at night after returning from overseas assignments. She had spent almost a decade believing he was gone. But if Mason was right, then her father had been involved in exposing the same network Mercer was trying to bury. Shadow suddenly rushed toward the hallway door again, barking violently now. Not warning anymore. Panic. Claire wiped at her eyes quickly and looked through the glass panel. Her stomach dropped instantly. 2 security officers were walking toward room 214 beside Dr. Adrian Mercer. Calm. Controlled. Mercer carried a clipboard tucked beneath one arm while speaking quietly to them. He knows, Mason whispered hoarsely. Claire's mind raced. If Mercer recognized her last name from the records tonight, then everything changed. This was never random, never coincidence. Shadow growled louder as the group approached the door. Mercer's eyes lifted slowly through the glass until they locked directly onto Claire's face. And for the first time all night, the older doctor smiled with genuine recognition. Not surprise. Recognition. He already knew exactly who she was. The hallway outside room 214 seemed to narrow as Dr. Adrian Mercer approached with the 2 security officers beside him. Rainwater streaked the windows behind them in silver lines, and the pale hospital lights reflected softly across the polished floor like cold moonlight on water. Shadow stood directly between the door and Mason Reed's bed now, every muscle rigid beneath his dark coat, a low growl trembling through the room like distant thunder. Claire Bennett could barely breathe. Mercer knew her name. Worse than that, he knew her father. The realization hollowed something inside her chest she had spent years trying to protect. Mason watched her carefully from the bed, exhaustion written across every bruise on his face. Yet his eyes remained sharp now. Awake. Present. Claire, he whispered. Listen to me. But she could not stop staring at Mercer through the glass. Memories surfaced faster now. Her father standing in the kitchen long after midnight with unopened mail scattered across the table. The way he used to check parked cars outside their Charleston apartment before taking her to school. The trembling in his hands the final week before he disappeared overseas. She had spent 10 years grieving a man who might have spent all that time hiding or running. The security officers stopped outside the room while Mercer spoke quietly to them. Calm, professional, almost reassuring. Claire noticed how easily he smiled, how normal he looked beneath the fluorescent lights. That frightened her more than anger ever could. Shadow barked sharply once as Mercer reached toward the door handle. Mason pushed himself upright farther despite the pain twisting through his body. Do not let them separate us, he rasped. Claire turned toward him finally. His breathing was shallow, but there was urgency in his eyes now stronger than fear. Why me? She whispered. Why will my father send you to find me? Mason swallowed hard. Because he trusted you. The words hit harder than she expected. Claire felt tears burn behind her eyes again, but she forced them back. Mason looked toward Shadow beside the bed. Your father saved my life that night, he continued weakly. After the explosion, he found me trapped beneath debris inside the warehouse. Shadow would not leave me, even when the fire spread. The German shepherd lowered his head softly against Mason's arm, as if the memory still lived inside him too. Your father carried evidence out with us, Mason whispered. Files, names, payment records, everything linking Mercer to illegal shipments. Claire's pulse hammered. Then where is it now? Mason's expression darkened. That is what Mercer has been searching for ever since. The hallway door suddenly clicked softly. Shadow lunged forward instantly with another warning growl. One of the security officers stepped halfway inside, palms raised cautiously. "Easy," he said carefully. "Dr. Mercer only wants to speak with the patient." Claire moved protectively closer to Mason's bed without realizing it. "At 4:40 in the morning?" she asked sharply. The officer hesitated. Mercer stepped into view behind him, white coat perfectly pressed despite the storm outside. "Miss Bennett," he said gently, "you look frightened." His calm voice made the room feel even colder. Shadow's growl deepened. Mercer studied the dog for a long moment before looking back at Claire. "Animals remember fear," he said quietly. "Sometimes longer than people do." Mason clenched the blanket tightly. "Stay away from her." Mercer's eyes shifted toward him with something almost resembling disappointment. "You should have stayed unconscious, Sergeant." The heart monitor quickened immediately. Beep, beep, beep. Claire noticed the security officers exchanging uncertain glances now. They still did not understand what was happening. To them, this looked like a frightened trauma patient and an aggressive service dog. Mercer stepped one pace closer to the doorway. "Claire," he said softly, "your father made choices that destroyed many lives. I try to protect him." "You are lying." Mason snapped weakly. Mercer ignored him. Elias Bennett stole evidence from dangerous people. People far beyond this hospital. Rain pounded harder outside as thunder shook the windows again. He knew those files would put his daughter at risk. Mercer continued. "That is why he disappeared." Claire's throat tightened painfully. "If my father is alive," she whispered, "where is he?" For the first time all night, Mercer's expression shifted slightly. Not fear, regret. "That," he said quietly, "depends on whether he believes you are still safe." Shadow suddenly stopped growling. The dog's ears lifted sharply toward the hallway behind Mercer. Then he backed away from the door with a soft, uneasy whine. Claire frowned instantly. Shadow was reacting to something else now. Something beyond Mercer. A second later, the elevator at the end of the corridor opened with a soft metallic ding. Everyone turned. A tall woman stepped out wearing a dark raincoat with the hood partially covering blonde hair beneath it. The moment Claire saw her face, her breath vanished completely, because she recognized the woman from an old photograph hidden for years inside her father's desk drawer. The woman standing near the elevator looked like someone pulled from a forgotten memory. Rainwater clung to the shoulders of her dark coat, and strands of blonde hair framed a face Claire Bennett had only seen once before in an old faded photograph hidden beneath stacks of medical journals inside her father's desk. The same sharp cheekbones, the same pale green eyes. Shadow stopped growling completely. Instead, the German shepherd tilted his head and released a soft, uncertain whine, as though even he recognized something buried deep in memory. Dr. Adrian Mercer's calm expression vanished for the first time that night. "You should not have come here," he said quietly. The woman ignored him. Her attention locked on Claire instead, and grief passed across her face so suddenly it almost hurt to witness. "Claire," she whispered, "you look so much like him." Claire's throat tightened instantly. "You knew my father." The woman nodded once. "My name is Anna Mercer." The name hit the room like a cold wind. Mason Reed stared at her in disbelief. "Mercer," Anna glanced briefly toward Adrian before answering softly. "He is my brother." Silence swallowed the room except for the storm outside and the steady rhythm of Mason's heart monitor. One of the security officers looked completely lost now, eyes shifting between the siblings standing on opposite sides of the hallway. Adrian exhaled slowly and removed his glasses. For the first time, he looked older. Tired. "Anna," he said carefully, "this is not your concern anymore." "It became my concern when innocent people started disappearing," she answered. Her voice did not rise, but the sadness inside it cut deeper than anger ever could. Claire felt her pulse hammering harder. "Where is my father?" Anna looked at her for a long moment before answering. "Alive." The single word nearly broke Claire apart. Tears blurred her vision instantly. Mason closed his eyes briefly beside the bed, as if relief itself hurt. Shadow moved quietly toward Claire and pressed against her side, grounding her before her knees could fail beneath her. Anna stepped farther into the ICU corridor. Your father uncovered financial records connecting private contractors to illegal weapons shipments disguised as humanitarian aid. Adrian tried to expose it internally at first. Claire looked sharply toward the older doctor. What? Adrian's jaw tightened. You think this was simple? He asked quietly. There were senators involved, military executives, international brokers, men powerful enough to erase entire operations without consequence. Rain battered the windows harder. Elias stole evidence before the network could bury it, Adrian continued. Once that happened, everyone connected to him became targets. Mason stared at him bitterly. So you helped poison me? Adrian looked genuinely pained for the first time all night. I kept you sedated because if word spread that you survived, others would come. Claire shook her head in disbelief. You altered medication. You erased records. Because panic gets people killed, Adrian snapped quietly. Then his voice softened again. I was trying to buy time. Shadow suddenly barked once toward the hallway again. Fast footsteps echoed. From the far end of the corridor, 3 Charleston police officers entered moments later beside hospital administration staff, responding to the overnight security alerts. The tension inside the ICU wing shifted instantly. Adrian lowered his eyes briefly. Anna stepped closer to the officers before anyone else could speak. There are files connected to illegal military transport operations, she said calmly. My brother has evidence. Claire stared at Adrian. Do you? The older man looked exhausted now beneath the pale fluorescent lights. Slowly he reached inside his coat and removed a thin envelope sealed in plastic. Everything Elias gathered before he disappeared, he said quietly. Names, transactions, offshore accounts. Mason watched him carefully. Then why keep hiding? Adrian's expression hollowed. Because your convoy was not the only one attacked. Silence fell again. Even the officers hesitated now. Claire accepted the envelope with trembling hands. Inside rested photographs, documents, and one small worn key attached to a faded military tag. Her father's initials were engraved into the metal. Tears slipped silently down her face. Shadow rested his head gently against her arm, while Mason watched from the hospital bed with tired eyes filled not with suspicion anymore, but understanding. Outside, dawn finally began pushing pale blue light through the rain clouds over Charleston Harbor. The storm was weakening. The officers escorted Adrian slowly down the corridor, while Anna remained near the doorway, her expression heavy with years of regret. Before disappearing into the elevator, Adrian looked back toward Claire one final time. Your father never stopped trying to come home, he said quietly. Then the doors closed. Claire stood frozen beneath the soft hospital lights, with the envelope pressed against her chest. The conflict was ending. The lies, the fear, the endless questions. Yet one truth still remained untouched inside her heart. If her father was alive after all these years, why had he never come back for her? 3 weeks later, the rain was gone from Charleston Harbor, but the memory of that night still clung to the halls of veterans. Hospital, like the fading scent of antiseptic and stormwater. Morning sunlight spilled softly through the wide hospital windows now, warming the pale tile floors that once felt so cold beneath fluorescent light. Room 214 stood empty. The monitors were silent. The bed neatly made. Only faint scratches near the doorway remained where Shadow's nails had scraped against the floor during those long hours he refused to leave Mason Reed alone. Claire Bennett paused there before the start of her shift, fingers resting lightly against the old doorframe. Sometimes she still heard the echoes, the low growl, the thunder, the quiet fear inside Mason's voice when he warned her not to trust the wrong people. Yet what stayed with her most was not the fear. It was the moment Shadow looked at her like he already knew who she was before she did. Downstairs near the harbor entrance, Mason sat quietly on a weathered wooden bench overlooking the water while the early December breeze rolled in from the Atlantic, carrying the scent of salt and distant fishing boats. Shadow rested beside him beneath the pale morning sun, older now somehow, though only weeks had passed. The German shepherd's dark coat shimmered softly in the light while gulls circled lazily above the docks. Mason's injuries were healing. Slowly, The bruises had faded. The nightmares had not. Some nights he still woke hearing radio static and collapsing concrete. But Shadow always woke first. Always. Claire stepped outside carrying 2 cups of coffee and a thin envelope folded beneath her arm. Mason looked up and managed the faintest smile. "You're getting better at sneaking up on people," he said quietly. Claire handed him the coffee before sitting beside him. "That dog still watches me like I am carrying classified documents." Shadow lifted his head briefly at the sound of her voice, then rested it gently against Mason's knee again. "Calm now. Peaceful." Claire stared out across the water for a long moment before speaking. "The authorities confirmed most of the files were authentic," she said softly. "Offshore transfers, illegal shipments, missing personnel reports. They reopened multiple investigations." Mason nodded. "Once. Neither of them mentioned Adrian Mercer by name. Some wounds did not need reopening." Claire looked down at the envelope in her hands. Worn edges. No return address. It had arrived at the hospital that morning. Inside was a single photograph. Her father, standing near a small fishing marina somewhere along the Gulf Coast. Older now, thinner, a gray beard hiding part of his face beneath a baseball cap. On the back, only 6 handwritten words. "I never stopped watching over you." Mason studied the photograph quietly. "Do you think he will come back?" he asked. Claire swallowed hard. The harbor breeze tugged gently at loose strands of hair near her face. "I do not know." Her voice trembled slightly despite herself. "Part of me wants him to walk through that hospital door tomorrow." She stared down at the faded picture again. "Another part of me wonders what kind of life forces a father to stay hidden while his daughter grows up alone." Silence settled softly between them. Not empty silence. Human silence. The kind shared by people who had survived something too heavy for easy words. A church bell rang faintly somewhere across the city. Shadow suddenly lifted his head sharply toward the far edge of the marina parking lot. His ears twitched once. Mason noticed immediately. "What is it, boy?" The German shepherd stood slowly, gaze fixed beyond a row of parked trucks near the water. Claire followed his stare. For one brief moment, she thought she saw someone standing there. Tall, motionless, a man in a dark jacket, watching from a distance beneath the morning sun. Then a passing delivery van blocked the view for half a second. When it moved again, the figure was gone. Shadow did not bark. He simply kept staring toward the empty space where the man had been. Claire's eyes filled quietly. "Do you think that was him?" she whispered. Mason looked toward the harbor where sunlight shimmered across the water like scattered pieces of glass. Then he glanced down at Shadow, standing silently beside them, still watching the distant parking lot with unwavering focus. "I think," Mason said softly, "some people stay hidden because they believe it is the only way to protect the ones they love." The wind moved gently through Shadow's fur as the dog finally relaxed and returned beside the bench. Claire folded the photograph carefully and slipped it back inside the envelope against her chest. Above them, the clouds drifted slowly apart, revealing a pale winter sky stretching endlessly over Charleston Harbor. And somewhere beyond that horizon, maybe closer than any of them realized, a man who had vanished years ago was still watching from the shadows while one loyal dog quietly kept his final promise. In one of the most emotional animal stories you will ever hear, a wounded U.S. Marine wakes inside a Charleston Veterans Hospital while his loyal German shepherd refuses to leave the doorway of room 214. As storms rage outside and strange events unfold through the night, the former military K-9 senses danger long before anyone else does. What begins as a quiet hospital recovery soon becomes one of those unforgettable animal stories filled with hidden memories, betrayal, loyalty, and the kind of bond only forged through war. As a compassionate nurse uncovers mysterious evidence tied to a classified mission overseas, the Marine and his devoted dog are pulled back into a deadly secret buried for years beneath military transport operations and missing evidence files. Through haunting discoveries, emotional revelations, and moments of quiet courage, this cinematic journey explores trust, sacrifice, survival, and the deep connection between a soldier and the German Shepherd who never stopped protecting him. Fans of emotional rescue dramas, military mystery narratives, and heartfelt animal stories will be drawn into a suspenseful tale where every hallway, every storm, and every glance from the loyal K9 carries meaning. With powerful emotional storytelling, layered suspense, and unforgettable scenes between the Marine, the nurse, and the faithful dog who remembers more than any human ever could, this story stands among the most gripping animal stories inspired by loyalty, trauma, healing, and hope. If you love deeply emotional animal stories about military heroes, loyal dogs, hidden truths, second chances, and quiet miracles that stay with you long after, the ending fades. This unforgettable journey between a U.S. Marine and his German Shepherd will leave a lasting mark on your heart.